I should have driven straight home that night, but after 14 hours at the clinic, my brain felt like wet cotton, and the storm that swept over the Vermont mountains had turned the highway into a white maze where the headlights barely carved out a path. Snow slashed sideways across the windshield, each gust threatening to push my car toward the guardrail, and the wipers fought a losing battle against the buildup of ice. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to remind myself that this stretch of Highway 89 was the same one everyone in town warned newcomers about, the same place where a woman had been attacked a few winters back after stopping for a stranger during a storm. I repeated the warning in my head like a chant. Do not stop. Do not open your window. Do not trust the dark. Just get home, Sam. Just get through the night. But halfway around a bend where the wind screamed between two ridges, my headlights caught something in the road. At first, it looked like a mound of snow that had collected in an odd shape, but the second I eased my foot off the gas, I saw it move. It jolted forward, then slumped again. My breath froze in my chest as the shape resolved into a man kneeling directly in the lane, his shoulders shaking violently. He wore no jacket, just a dress shirt plastered to his skin as if he had fallen into an ice-covered river. His hair was soaked, stiffening in frozen strands. His lips had a bluish tint even from a distance. Every instinct I had ever cultivated screamed that this was dangerous, that a woman alone at night should never stop for a stranger in the middle of a snowstorm, especially not on a road like this. But the man did not look up. He did not wave for help or try to stand. Instead, he bent forward, both hands gripping the snow like he was trying to keep the world from tipping beneath him. Then, something glimmered in the beam of my headlights. A small metal object slid from his hand, rolling in a slow, deliberate arc before stopping near his knee. It was a wedding band, a man's band, thick, engraved, the kind people take off only when they have lost something more than warmth. He reached for it, but his fingers were trembling too badly to grasp it, and the ring slipped away again, vanishing halfway under the snow. My pulse hammered as fear collided with something deeper, something older than caution. Kindness. Responsibility. The voice of my mother telling me you do not walk past people who are hurting, not if you want to keep your humanity intact. Even so, my hands shook as I slid my car into park. The wind pounded the chassis. I locked the doors automatically. I cracked the window just an inch. Are you hurt? My words were ripped away by the storm. He did not answer. He just shivered harder, head bowing, like his body was giving out. Before I could decide whether to step out or speed away, a roar built behind me. A black SUV tore past in the opposite lane, spraying slush across my hood. Its headlights swept over the man's face for a split second, and I saw his expression change. Not fear of freezing, not exhaustion, but terror. Pure, instinctive terror. He flinched so hard he almost toppled sideways. Then the SUV disappeared around the bend as if it had been hunting him. My stomach twisted. Something in me knew that if I left him here, he might not last 5 more minutes. And something else whispered that whatever he was running from was far more dangerous than the storm. I shut off the engine. The silence inside the car felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I opened the door. The wind slammed into me with a force that stole my breath. Snow flew into my face, sharp as needles. I pushed forward one step, then another, boots sinking deep into the drifts. He did not seem to hear me approach. When I reached him, he swayed hard to the left, and I grabbed his arm. His skin was ice cold, the kind of cold that means cells are beginning to die. He whispered something I could not hear. His head fell against my shoulder. I told him I had his ring. He tried to turn back toward the snow, but his body was too weak to move without help. I bent down, scooped up the cold band, and shoved it into my coat pocket before he could lose it again. Come on. You have to stand. He tried to push himself up, but his legs buckled beneath him, so I hauled him upright with every ounce of strength I had left from my shift. Snow swirled around us in dizzying spirals. His breath rattled against my collarbone. The storm roared as if angry that I was taking him away from it. We staggered back to my car, his weight sagging into me more with each step. When I finally got the passenger door open and pushed him inside, he collapsed against the seat, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. I stood there for a moment, chest-heaving snow collecting in my hair and lashes, and everything in me whispered that my life had just taken a turn I could not predict or undo. I slammed the door, ran around to the driver's side, climbed in, and blasted the heat. As the vents groaned awake and warm air slowly filled the cabin, one truth hit me so hard it felt like my ribs tightened to hold it. If I had not stopped just then, he would have died on that highway. And I did not know yet that saving him would cost me the life I thought I understood. The heater blasted warm air across the dashboard, but the man beside me kept shivering so violently that the entire seat trembled under him, and for a few seconds I wondered if I should have driven straight to the nearest hospital instead of trying to stabilize him myself. But the nearest ER was 45 minutes away, and the storm had swallowed most of the road behind us. So I did what nurses do when fear threatens to take over. I focused on the next breath, the next assessment, the next tiny act that might keep someone alive. I reached into my emergency kit, tore open a thermal blanket, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He flinched as if even kindness hurt. "I'm Sam," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you tell me your name?" For a moment, he didn't seem to understand the question, his eyes unfocused and glassy, but then he whispered a single word. "Evan." His voice rasped like someone who had been running through cold air for far too long. No last name, no explanation. Just Evan. I nodded, not pushing. His hands were trembling so hard that the blanket rustled like leaves in the wind. His knuckles were scraped raw, and a faint bruise shadowed the inside of his wrist. The torn seam on his shirt sleeve looked recent, the threads frayed, but not weather-beaten. His hair was damp, not frozen stiff, which meant he had not been in the storm as long as his condition suggested. Someone had chased him into it. Or he had run from something. Every few seconds he lifted his head, eyes darting to the side mirror, breath hitching as if expecting that black SUV to reappear at any moment. When the wind slammed against the car, he jerked sharply, shoulders tightening under the blanket. "Easy," I said, keeping my tone soft. "You're safe for now." He swallowed hard, but his gaze stayed fixed on the rearview mirror. "Safety is not something I get to have." I almost asked what he meant, but before I could, the radio crackled to life with an emergency weather advisory, followed by a local news anchor's voice cutting through the static. Tonight's Harrington-Blackwell wedding rehearsal on Lake Willoughby was abruptly interrupted after an unexpected disruption led to the groom's disappearance. Sources report a search is underway. My hand froze halfway to the heater knob. Evan's body reacted before the words fully landed. He went rigid as if his spine locked into place. His knuckles blanched. His breath came in a thin, brittle gasp. I lowered the volume quickly, but the damage was done. The radio had said groom. Missing. Search underway. Harrington Blackwell. I turned slowly toward him. "Evan," I said quietly. "Were you at that wedding?" He blinked, and because he was too drained to hide anything, the truth flickered across his face like a passing shadow. Not even a lie. Not even a denial. Just panic. He did not answer, but the silence between us filled itself with certainty. I looked down at the passenger footwell. Snowmelt pooled around his shoes. His dress shirt was high-quality fabric, wrinkled but unmistakably expensive. His cufflinks were gone, ripped out, or pulled off in a hurry. A faint imprint on his ring finger showed where a wedding band had been until the moment it slipped from his hand into the snow. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. The heater hummed. The storm pounded the roof. I felt the emotional tide surge up inside me, a mixture of fear and empathy and the strange instinct that the universe had placed this broken man in my path for a reason I wasn't ready to understand yet. Finally, he whispered, "I did not plan to run." Not like that. His eyes drifted toward the windshield, watching snow snake across the glass. I just couldn't breathe anymore. I waited, letting the silence make room for him. Sometimes people in crisis need quiet more than questions. He dragged in a slow breath, the kind that scraped its way out of a bruised lung. I kept thinking I would go back, that it was just cold feet or panic or a moment of weakness. But then the storm hit, and it felt like the world was telling me to disappear before they found me. Before who found you? I asked gently. He shook his head, jaw clenching, a flash of fear tightening his features. They always find me. They always do. I didn't know who they were, but the bruises and torn fabric told enough of the story. I reached for the insulated cup I kept in the console filled with the weak emergency coffee I brewed at the clinic earlier. Here, sip this. It's warm. It's not good, but it'll help. He tried to lift the cup, but his fingers trembled so violently that I had to steady his hand with mine. The moment our hands touched, he startled as if warmth was something foreign to him. The first sip made him flinch. Then he took another slower one, and a faint groan escaped his throat. Good, I said quietly. Keep drinking. His breathing settled a little, though his eyes kept drifting back to the mirror. The emotional rhythm rose again when headlights appeared behind us, cutting through the blizzard. Evan stiffened instantly, gripping the blanket with white-knuckled panic. That's them, he whispered. My heart jerked. But then the headlights veered off onto a side road and disappeared behind a curtain of trees. Evan sagged forward, shaking with adrenaline. I didn't touch him. Sometimes people need space to let panic drain out of them. When he finally lifted his face, his voice was barely audible. You should let me out. I'm danger to you. I shook my head. You're freezing injured and half-conscious. I'm not leaving you on the side of the road. His eyes filled with something fragile, something that looked like disbelief mixed with grief. No one chooses me without a reason, he said hoarsely. No one helps me without wanting something. My throat tightened. Not everyone wants something back, Evan. Sometimes helping is just what decent people do. He stared at me as if the idea was so foreign it hurt. And as the storm closed in around us again, I felt the truth settle heavy and irreversible in my chest. Whatever he was running from, it wasn't small. It wasn't simple. And now, without meaning to, I was part of it. Joanne's diner appeared through the storm like a faint yellow glow floating in a sea of white, the kind of roadside refuge every mountain town clung to when the weather tried to swallow the world. I pulled into the tiny parking lot, the tires skidding slightly on the ice before catching traction, and for a moment I just sat there gripping the wheel, letting my pulse settle as the wind battered the car. Evan looked worse than before, his head resting against the window, breath fogging the glass in faint, uneven bursts. His skin had taken on that pale, waxy sheen I recognized from near hypothermia cases, and a stab of fear cut through me. We needed warmth, real warmth, food, a break from the storm, and maybe a moment to think without the threat of black SUVs materializing out of the darkness. I shut off the engine and placed a hand on his arm. We're going inside. Stay with me. His eyelids fluttered, but he nodded weakly, the smallest movement like he was surrendering to the idea rather than agreeing. The wind nearly ripped the car door from my hand as I stepped out. Snow slapped me sideways, stinging my cheeks, soaking into my scrubs beneath the old winter jacket I kept in the trunk. I rushed around to Evan's side, helped him out, and threw his arm over my shoulder. He felt heavier than his frame suggested, like the cold had turned his muscles to stone. Together we stumbled toward the entrance, each step a battle against the storm. When Joanne opened the door from the inside, warm air rushed out in a wave, carrying the smell of soup coffee and that comforting diner grease that clung to the walls like a memory. Jesus, Sam, she said, eyes widening. What happened to him? Found him on the highway, I answered as we staggered inside. Hypothermia, I think. Maybe shock. Joanne took one look at him and moved with the quick certainty of someone who had seen more emergencies than she cared to count. Sit him here, honey, closest to the heater. The diner was nearly empty, only 2 truckers nursing coffee and a college kid with headphones hunched over a laptop. The storm howled against the windows, rattling them in their frames, but inside, the lights cast a warm glow over the booths, turning the vinyl seats into little islands of safety. I eased Evan into the corner booth, and he slumped against the wall, eyes closed, breath shallow. Joanne returned with a steaming bowl of tomato soup and placed it in front of him, her expression tightening when he didn't immediately react. Sweetheart, can you hear me? Try to eat something. He opened his eyes, slowly blinking, as if the light hurt him. When he lifted the spoon, his hands shook so badly that soup spilled back into the bowl. I steadied his wrist, guiding the spoon to his mouth. He flinched at the heat, then took another sip and another. After the third spoonful, a single sound escaped him, a raw, broken exhale that carried exhaustion pain and something else I couldn't name. "When was the last time you ate?" I asked gently. He shook his head without answering, and I felt something inside me twist. The radio played softly from the counter. Some old folk song muffled by static and clattering dishes. For a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. Then the television mounted above the counter switched to the local news. A breaking banner flashed across the screen. Joanne muttered something under her breath and reached for the remote, but she wasn't fast enough. The anchor's voice rose above the din. "Developing tonight in the Harrington-Blackwell wedding controversy, new footage has emerged showing the groom running from the ceremony moments before he disappeared." The screen changed. Grainy cell phone video. Snow. A man in a dress shirt sprinting through the courtyard of an elaborate lakeside estate. I froze. So did Evan. Because the man on the screen was him. Same shirt, same hair, same frantic desperation. The camera zoomed in on his face just long enough for anyone with eyes to make the connection. The truckers turned toward us. The college kid lowered his headphones. Joanne's hand hovered mid-air, still holding the remote, stunned, speechless. One of the truckers stood up, slowly pulling out his phone. "You're kidding me," he said, filming Evan from across the diner. "That's the runaway groom." The words hit Evan like a blow. His breathing quickened. His hands clenched the edge of the table. I stood between him and the phone instinctively. "Put that away," I snapped. "He's not a story for you to post." The man shrugged but kept filming. The second trucker leaned forward. "How much you think the tabloids would pay for this?" Fear splintered across Evan's face, sharp and immediate. He pushed himself out of the booth, stumbling backward, knocking over the steaming bowl. The soup splashed across the floor. His lips parted in a soundless gasp. He looked like he was about to faint. Joanne stepped forward. "That's enough!" she barked. "You two knock it off or get out!" But the damage was already done. Evan was shaking again, worse than before. Eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting shadowy figures to break through them at any second. I grabbed his hand. "We're leaving. Now." The words came out firmer than I intended, but I didn't care. He followed, barely keeping his balance, and we rushed toward the back hallway that connected to the kitchen exit. The storm roared louder outside, snow slashing across the glass like claws. Evan stumbled, gripping my arm, his voice cracking. "They found me." I shook my head. "No. Not yet. Not if we move." We pushed through the swinging kitchen door into the narrow prep corridor, the faint smell of onions and grilled cheese lingering in the air. As we reached the back exit, thunderous footsteps echoed from the diner floor. Voices rising, phones recording, questions shouting. I shoved the door open, the cold exploding against us once more. The snow hit like shrapnel. Evan hunched against it. Behind us, someone yelled, "He's back here!" My heart slammed against my ribs as I pulled him into the raging white night. And as the diner door swung shut behind us, swallowed by the storm, I knew the fragile safety we had found had just shattered. The moment the back door of the diner slammed shut behind us, the storm swallowed every sound, turning the world into a swirling white void, where even the silhouette of the building vanished within seconds. Snow blasted sideways, stinging my cheeks and filling the gaps in my jacket faster than I could brush it off. Evan clutched my arm with a trembling grip, his breath rasping in painful bursts as if every inhale threatened to collapse his lungs. We could barely see 10 feet ahead, but I knew the layout behind Joanne's diner like the back of my hand. Beyond the narrow lot was a strip of forest that led to a service path, and further up the ridge stood the emergency cabin the clinic used for remote winter calls. It was the only place close enough to reach on foot, the only place no one else would think to search. Evan stumbled beside me, fighting the wind with every step. The snow came up to our ankles, then to our shins, turning each movement into a slow battle against gravity itself. Somewhere behind us, the faint echo of the diner door opened again, followed by muffled voices. Someone shouted something I couldn't make out through the roaring wind. Evan tensed, panic slicing through him. "They're coming!" "No," I said, pulling him harder through the trees. "They're just curious customers. You're safe." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The storm made the air thick, almost pressurized, like danger was crouching in the white layers of snow, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Evan's boots slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder, and he fell to his knees with a strangled gasp. I crouched beside him instantly. Evan, look at me. You have to stay awake. The cold will take your body before you realize it. He tried to stand, legs shaking violently, but his strength buckled again. His face was drained of color except for the burns left by the freezing wind. His lips trembled with words he couldn't seem to form. I grabbed both his hands and pressed them between my palms. They felt like carved stone. Too cold. Too stiff. We don't have a choice, I said, forcing calm into my voice. We have to get to the cabin. It's warm. There's medical equipment. You'll be okay if you just stay with me. He closed his eyes, jaw tight with pain. My father's men. They always find me. They're not here, I insisted. Look at me. You're not alone. He opened his eyes slightly, and in them I saw the raw, unfiltered terror of someone who had been hunted long before tonight. It sent a chill through me sharper than the storm. I hooked my arm under his and heaved him up again. Snow whipped around us like furious spirits as we staggered deeper into the trees. The diner's glow disappeared entirely, replaced by the shadowy outlines of tall pines bending under the weight of fresh snow. Their branches cracked occasionally, echoing like distant gunshots in the storm. The forest floor dipped downward without warning. My boot slid, dragging Evan with me as we tumbled down a short, steep incline hidden beneath the storm's chaos. We slammed into a drift at the bottom, snow puffing outward in a cold explosion that stole the breath from my lungs. Evan gasped in pain, curling slightly as if the impact had jarred something inside him. You okay? I managed coughing as I pushed myself upright. He nodded faintly, but his body told another story. He was reaching his limit. I forced myself up, grabbed fistfuls of snow-laden branches, and hauled us both back to our feet. The incline had dropped us closer to the service path, a fact I clung to like a lifeline. We followed the faint indentation in the snow that marked where emergency vehicles sometimes drove, though tonight the path was nothing more than a ghost of an outline. Somewhere in the violence of the storm, a new sound rose, a low mechanical rumble carried by the wind. I froze. Evan's head snapped up. That's them. His voice cracked with panic. No, I told myself that's impossible. But then a beam of light swept faintly across the trees behind us. A second light followed, a pair of headlights crawling slowly along the road above, too deliberate to be coincidence. My breath hitched. I grabbed Evan's wrist. Move! Now! We plunged forward again, forcing our bodies through the thickening snow. My legs burned. My lungs ached. Evan stumbled repeatedly, his weight dragging against me. The headlights grew brighter for an instant, then faded as the vehicle adjusted course, but the rumble stayed a reminder that someone out there was searching the night for something or someone they were determined to find. After what felt like an eternity, the dark outline of the emergency cabin emerged through the storm, small and squat, half buried under snow, but unmistakable. Relief surged through me like warm water. Almost there, I whispered, tightening my grip on Evan. Stay with me. He nodded, barely conscious. The last stretch was a blur. My boots slipped. His knees buckled. The wind screamed as though trying to hold us back. But finally I reached the cabin door, yanked it open, and pulled him inside with the last of my strength. Warmth hit us slowly from the generator-powered heater, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to pull someone back from the edge of hypothermia. I guided Evan to the cot against the wall and ripped open the emergency blanket kit, wrapping him tightly before stripping off his wet shirt and replacing it with one of the wool emergency tops stored in the cabinets. His skin was frighteningly cold. I rubbed his arms in steady motions, trying to coax blood back to the surface. He winced in pain, the kind that told me his nerves were waking back up. I reached for the thermal pads and placed them under his armpits and along his torso, careful not to warm him too quickly. His breathing steadied in tiny increments. His hands twitched. His eyes fluttered. I'm sorry. he whispered hoarsely. I didn't mean to drag you into this. I sat beside him, pulling another blanket over his legs. You didn't drag me. I chose to stop. You saved my life. His voice broke. Not just tonight. You don't understand. You don't know what they'll do. Then tell me, I said softly. Tell me what you're running from. Tell me why a man dressed for a wedding was collapsing in a snowstorm with terror in his eyes. He swallowed, throat-bobbing. His chest rose in a trembling breath as he stared at the ceiling like he was trying to gather the courage to speak. Before he could answer, a crunching sound echoed faintly from outside. Snow being stepped on. Not wind, not branches. Footsteps. Evan's entire body tensed. My heart stopped. The storm had hidden us, but maybe not well enough. I turned off the lantern, instinctively plunging the cabin into darkness except for the faint glow from the heater. Evan's hand found mine under the blanket. His grip was ice cold, terrified. They found me, he whispered. Not yet, I breathed, squeezing his hand. Not if I can help it. And as the footsteps circled the cabin slow and deliberate, I felt the truth press down deep in my bones. Whatever this man had escaped from was now standing just outside our only shelter, and I was the only thing between him and the darkness clawing its way toward us. For a long moment after the footsteps faded, the only sound inside the cabin was Evan's ragged breathing and the faint hum of the heater struggling against the cold. I kept my hand wrapped around his beneath the blanket, waiting for some sign that he was coming back to himself after the terror that had nearly swallowed him whole. When his fingers finally loosened enough for me to pull away and turn on the lantern again, his eyes tracked the light as if unsure whether he was waking from a nightmare or falling deeper into one. The storm raged outside, battering the walls with violent gusts that made the thin windows tremble. But here, inside the tiny cabin, a fragile stillness settled, the kind that comes only when a person is too exhausted to run anymore. I reached for the medical kit, checking his pulse, his temperature, the color returning slowly to his skin. When I touched the pulse point at his neck, he flinched like I had startled him back into his own body. You're safe for now, I murmured. No one followed us. He swallowed hard, eyes unfocused. They always follow. Not always, I said gently. Not tonight. But even as I spoke, I knew the safety we had was temporary at best. Whatever he was tangled in had long arms and even longer shadows. After a moment, his gaze drifted downward until it landed on my coat pocket. There, he whispered hoarsely. The ring. Can I have it back? I hesitated only because the question signaled more than a simple request. It signaled the beginning of a truth he had been drowning under. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and placed the metal band in his hand. His fingers closed around it like someone clutching a piece of a life they wish they could abandon. He stared at it without looking away, his jaw tightening with something between grief and fury. I waited, letting the silence stretch. People reveal themselves when you give them room to breathe. Eventually, he said, You saw the initials inside, didn't you? FH. I nodded. He exhaled a long, tired sound that carried years of weight. Fiona Harrington. Her name alone was enough to draw recognition even in our small mountain towns. The Harrington family owned half the luxury resorts in the region, and their wealth had grown so large it stopped feeling real. I thought of the news clip, the extravagant estate, the reporters swarming the lakefront property. You were supposed to marry her tonight, I said softly. He closed his eyes as if bracing against a blow. Yes! The storm groaned against the cabin, and his voice slipped out quietly like the truth had finally cracked open inside him. My real name is Evan Blackwell. And suddenly, everything clicked. The Blackwell family was older, wealthier, and more feared than the Harringtons. Their empire stretched across banking, real estate, political networks. They were the kind of dynasty that did not produce heirs so much as groomed them from birth for power. The runaway groom, I whispered. He nodded once. And when I didn't move, didn't recoil, didn't treat him like a headline, something softened behind his eyes. He looked down at the ring again, turning it in his fingers. I never wanted this marriage. It wasn't mine to want. Our fathers arranged it years ago. A business merger sealed with a wedding. My entire life laid out like an itinerary I didn't get to approve. His voice cracked, and he sank deeper into the blankets as if trying to disappear. I didn't even know Fiona until 2 months ago. She's not awful. She's trapped too. She just hides it better. I could see the truth in the way he said her name. This wasn't a dramatic lover's triangle or a scandalous escape from affection. This was two people suffocating under expectations carved in gold. "What happened tonight?" I asked softly. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. At the rehearsal dinner, everything felt wrong. The speeches, the photographers, the smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. My father's hand on my shoulder like a reminder to behave. The Harringtons watching me like I was a stock about to go public. It felt like he paused, searching for words, a cage I didn't realize I'd been locked inside until the door finally shut. I thought maybe it was nerves. Cold feet. But when I stepped outside to breathe, two of my father's men followed me. Not casually, not discreetly. They grabbed my arm and said I needed to stop embarrassing the families, that I needed to sign a prenuptial document before the ceremony, and when I tried to pull away, one of them tightened his grip hard enough to bruise me. My stomach twisted. "That explains your wrist," he nodded, eyes dropping. "I told them I needed air and tried to walk toward the lake. They followed. I kept walking. Then I ran, and the storm hit just in time to give me cover." "And you didn't go back," I said. "Because if I did, I'd sign every contract they put in front of me. I'd stand at that altar like a trained dog. I'd spend the rest of my life pretending everything was fine while slowly dying inside." His fingers tightened around the ring again. "I know it sounds dramatic, but I couldn't breathe, Sam. I really couldn't. I felt something in me soften in a way that was almost painful. I recognized that brand of desperation, the kind that forms when a person has been held in invisible chains for so long that freedom feels dangerous. "You did what you needed to survive," I said quietly. His eyes lifted to mine, raw and vulnerable. "No one has said that to me before. Not once. They only ask why I would dare run from the life people dream about." His voice tightened. "But no one asks whether it was a life I wanted." I reached out and placed my hand over his. The ring lay between our palms, cold metal warmed by our skin. "People confuse comfort with freedom," I said, "but they're not the same." He stared at me with a kind of astonished grief. "You're the first person who's looked at me like I'm human. Not a name, not a headline, not a transaction. Human." The word hung in the air, fragile and heavy. I wanted to say something to reassure him, to promise him that he wasn't alone in any of this, but the storm surged again, shaking the walls hard enough to rattle the lantern. He closed his fingers around the ring and whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Thank you for stopping on that road. Thank you for choosing me when everyone else in my life chooses what I can offer them." And in that dimly lit cabin with the storm clawing at the windows and a hunted man clinging to the first kindness he had been shown in years, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not love, not yet, but connection, recognition, the fragile beginning of a truth neither of us expected to find in a night like this. Sometimes the universe drops a person into your path, not to test your compassion, but to rewrite your destiny. By dawn, the storm had weakened enough for us to leave the cabin, though the sky still carried the bruised gray of a night that had not fully let go. Evan looked steadier after a few hours of rest and warmth, but the tension in his shoulders told me the reprieve was temporary. As we hiked back toward the service road, his steps were slow but determined. Like each footfall pulled him closer to a threshold he was terrified to cross, yet unwilling to avoid. When we finally reached my car, half buried in snow, behind Joanne's diner, he paused with one hand on the door handle. "You don't have to come with me to the city," he said quietly. I knew instantly that he meant it, that he was offering me a way out before whatever storm awaited us at Blackwell Tower swallowed me whole. But something inside me had shifted the moment I found him kneeling in the snow, and that shift had only deepened with everything he had confessed in the cabin. "I'm not leaving you alone to face this," I said. He swallowed hard, then nodded as if my choice meant more to him than the rising sun painting the ice in pale gold. The drive to the city was long and tense. Evan sat rigidly staring out the window at the passing miles, twisting the wedding ring in his fingers, like he couldn't decide if he wanted to throw it away or crush it into dust. When the skyline appeared through the fading storm clouds, he exhaled a shuddering breath. Blackwell Tower dominated the horizon like a monument to control and polished power, its sharp glass edges reflecting the pale winter light. Evan's posture shifted the moment he saw it, a subtle, bracing, a silent preparation for battle. As we approached the front entrance, a line of black SUVs waited like loyal sentinels. Men in tailored coats and earpieces moved across the pavement, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Evan froze. "Those are my father's men." I placed a hand lightly on his forearm. "You're not running this time." His jaw tightened. "No, this time I'm walking straight in." The lobby was a cold cathedral of marble chrome and muted voices. Every step we took echoed off the high ceilings. A receptionist's eyes widened when she saw Evan, and within seconds, 2 men in suits approached us, flanking him on either side. "Sir, your father has been searching for you." They reached for his arms, but he stepped back sharply. "Do not touch me." Their hesitation lasted only a beat before one said, "Your father requests your presence immediately in the executive boardroom." His tone implied there was no room for refusal. Evan lifted his chin. "Then that's where I'm going, and she's coming with me." The man's gaze flicked to me, confused, questioning. Evan's voice cut through the moment like steel. "If she doesn't go, neither do I. And you can explain to Maxwell Blackwell why his heir walked right back out the door." The men exchanged looks, then reluctantly stepped aside. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Evan stood beside me, his fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white. "You don't have to say anything once we're in there," he murmured. "Just stay close." But he didn't understand yet that staying close was never the hard part. Watching someone walk into their own fire and choosing to walk with them, that was the real choice. The boardroom doors opened with a heavy click that vibrated through the floor. Inside, a long obsidian table stretched the length of the room. Every chair was filled. Executives in sharp suits, lawyers with folders already open, the Harringtons seated together like polished statues carved from old money and cold ambition, cameras, PR representatives, and at the head of the table, standing rather than sitting, was Maxwell Blackwell. He was taller than Evan Broader, with silvering hair slicked back in an immaculate style. His presence radiated authority, sharpened into something colder than leadership. Across the room, Fiona Harrington sat with perfect posture, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The moment Evan entered, every eye in the room snapped toward him. Maxwell's voice cut through the air like an axe. "Sit. Now." Evan did not move. "I'm not here to be commanded," he said. His father's lips curled in an icy smile. "You vanished from your own wedding rehearsal. You humiliated 2 families on the eve of a multi-million-dollar merger. You will sit." Evan's shoulders squared with a quiet strength I hadn't seen fully until now. "Then maybe you shouldn't have tried to force my hand." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Fiona looked down, blinking rapidly. Her father leaned forward sharply. "Forced your hand?" "The arrangement was made years ago. What you did was reckless, selfish, and enough," Maxwell snapped. He picked up a stack of papers and slapped them onto the table. "You will sign this. It outlines corrective measures, image recovery protocols, and a new timeline for the ceremony. And he jabbed a finger toward me, will leave. My presence in that room was a breach of a world built on control, pedigree, and calculation. But I stepped forward anyway, the weight of the entire tower bearing down on my shoulders. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not leaving." Maxwell leveled a stare at me so icy it felt like the storm had followed us inside. "You were not invited into this conversation." Evan stepped between us instantly. "She stays." Maxwell's jaw twitched. "You think this girl matters. You think she's anything but a distraction." Evan didn't flinch. "She saved my life, and she'll stay because I trust her more than anyone in this room." A stunned silence followed. Fiona looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. She opened her mouth, and for the first time since we entered, she spoke. "I don't want this wedding either." Her voice trembled, but her honesty cut the room into pieces. Everyone turned to her. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but Fiona kept speaking, her voice cracking. "We're pawns in your merger. Nothing more." I never had a choice. Neither did he. Maxwell slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough of this nonsense, Evan. You will sit down and sign these documents. You will repair the damage you caused. You will fulfill your obligations." Or what Evan said quietly. "You'll disown me." Maxwell leaned back, eyes narrowing. "If necessary." "Then do it," Evan said. A collective gasp swept the room. I felt my breath catch. Maxwell stared at his son as if unable to process what he'd heard. "I won't be your heir," Evan continued. "I won't inherit Blackwell Holdings. I won't carry your empire. I won't be the face of a dynasty built on control and fear. I'm done." Maxwell's face reddened with fury. "You ungrateful fool! Do you have any idea what you are throwing away?" "Yes," Evan said. "My cage." Fiona covered her mouth as tears streaked her cheeks. Her father cursed under his breath. The lawyers scrambled papers, rustling in frantic confusion. And in that room filled with power wealth and cold precision, I saw something remarkable happen. Evan squared his shoulders, stepped away from his father, and took my hand. And as if reclaiming his own voice for the first time in his life, he said to everyone in that room, "I choose freedom. I choose my own life. And I choose the people who see me, not the name I was born into." Maxwell looked ready to explode. "You're making a mistake that will follow you forever." Evan squeezed my hand. "Maybe, but at least it will be my mistake." And as the boardroom erupted into chaos behind us, he led me out of the tower he had once been destined to rule, walking away not just from an empire, but from the chains that had bound him since childhood. When the glass doors of Blackwell Tower closed behind us, the noise of the boardroom war still echoed in my mind like distant thunder fading across a valley. But out here on the sidewalk, in the bite of winter air and the hum of city life rising around us, Evan stood still as stone, breathing in slow, uneven pulls, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just done. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a sky that looked softer than the storm that had chased us the night before, and for the first time since I found him kneeling on that highway, he didn't look hunted. He looked emptied, like someone who had finally laid down a burden heavy enough to break a spine. I touched his arm gently. "Are you okay?" His eyes flicked toward me, wide stunned, almost fragile. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know what I am without all of that." His gaze drifted back to the skyscraper, its windows glinting like cold judgment. For a moment, I thought he might collapse under the weight of everything he had just walked away from, but then he exhaled a long, trembling breath and whispered, "But I think I can breathe." It was such a small sentence, but it hit me harder than all the shouting in that boardroom. Breathing shouldn't be a luxury. Breathing shouldn't be something a man earns by breaking himself free. I slipped my hand into his. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's take you somewhere that isn't marble and money and obligations. Somewhere human." The drive out of the city felt lighter than the one going in. Evan stared out the window, watching the skyline shrink behind us, rubbing his thumb over the place where his father's ring had once dug into his skin. I caught him glancing at me every few minutes as if checking whether I was truly there or whether his life was about to vanish into another nightmare. When we reached the outskirts, the world shifted into rolling fields blanketed in snow, frozen barns and pines glittering with icicles. I turned toward Lake Champlain, the same place where I went to breathe on the hardest days of my work at the clinic. A quiet place. A place no one chased anyone. A place the world forgot in the best possible way. When I parked near the empty lakeshore, he stepped out slowly like he wasn't sure the ground would hold him. The lake spread out before us, half frozen, half shimmering in pale winter blue. The sunlight skipped across the surface like scattered diamonds. It was peaceful, simple, a world far from dynasties, mergers, and forced lives. Evan wrapped his coat tighter around himself, though the cold seemed to touch him less than the quiet did. "So this is freedom," he murmured almost to himself. The wind tugged playfully at his hair. He looked younger in that light, softer, more real than the man on the news who had run from his own wedding. I walked beside him along the shoreline. You don't have to know what comes next. You just have to know you survived the hardest part. He turned toward me, eyes shining with something raw. I didn't survive it alone. The way he said it made the air between us shift warm despite the winter. I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the lake, and he sat beside me, elbows on his knees, staring out like he was seeing the future for the first time, rather than the past he had escaped. I was supposed to be a Blackwell heir, he said quietly. Now I have no idea who I am. You're Evan, I replied. Not a dynasty, not a transaction. Just Evan. His mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't despair either. That might be enough, he whispered, for now. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was healing, a pause between two lives. Eventually, he turned toward me again, his breath visible in the cold air. May I ask you something? I nodded. Back on that road, why did you stop? You didn't know me. You didn't know if I was dangerous or lying or crazy. So why? I thought about my mother, about the lessons she left behind, like small lanterns in the darkest corners of my life. Because people deserve help, I said softly, even when the world tells you to keep driving, even when it scares you, even when it costs you something. He stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, something deeper than gratitude, something like awe. I don't think anyone has ever helped me without wanting something in return, he said. Until you. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't romance, not yet. This was recognition. Two people crossing paths at the exact moment one was breaking and the other refused to let him fall. Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out the wedding ring he had reclaimed the night before. It glinted in the sunlight, a symbol of everything he had run from. He held it up, watching the light catch the engraving inside. I thought this ring was going to be the start of a life I never wanted, he said. Now I think it marks the end of one. He closed his fist around it and lowered his hand. Then he looked at me, eyes warmer than they had been since the moment I found him on the highway. Sam. His voice softened. Can I ask you something impossible? My heartbeat picked up. Yes. His breath shook as he exhaled. Will you walk into whatever comes next with me? Not as anything defined, not as anything promised, just as the one person who made me believe I could start over. The tenderness in his voice nearly undid me. Instead of answering with words, I slid my hand into his again. My fingers fit between his as naturally as breathing. I didn't kiss him. He didn't kiss me. But the world shifted around us anyway, like the first quiet moment after a storm when the sky finally decides to let the sun through. And sitting there on that lakeshore bench with a runaway groom beside me and a new beginning stretching out across the winter water, I knew with absolute certainty that this was the first real day of his freedom. And maybe, in some small way, mine, too. 6 months later, the world felt like a completely different place. Though sometimes I still caught myself looking over my shoulder out of old habit, expecting storms that never came. Summer had settled over Vermont in that soft, golden way it did when the air smelled like warm pine and lake water, and the roads were lined with wildflowers instead of snowbanks. The clinic Evan and I opened, Free Haven Clinic, stood right at the edge of Maple Ridge, a modest building with pale blue siding, new windows, and a hand-painted sign a group of local kids made for us. Every time I walked through its doors, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. Inside, the waiting room was always full. Elderly patients who lived too far from the city to afford the trip. Families who had gone years without proper care. Teenagers who needed someone to listen without judgment. And through it all, Evan moved like a person who had finally found a place where his heart fit. He handled the fundraising, the logistics, the mountains of paperwork. He learned faces, remembered names, carried groceries to patients' cars, and fixed the leaky sink twice before the handyman even returned his calls. The town adored him. They called him the groom who escaped the storm, a nickname that made him blush every time someone used it. I watched him change day by day from a man running from a gilded cage into a man building something worth staying for. Some mornings I found him standing outside before opening hours, leaning against the porch rail with a cup of coffee, looking out at the road with a peacefulness that would have been impossible to imagine half a year earlier. One evening in July, after the last patient had gone home and the light outside softened into that honey-colored glow that made everything look touched by magic, Evan knocked on my office door. "You busy?" he asked. His voice was warm, but his eyes carried a flicker of nerves. "Not really," I said. "What's up?" He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure whether the floor would shift beneath him. Then he reached into his pocket. My breath caught before I even saw what he held. The ring. Not polished. Not reset. Not replaced. The same ring that had fallen into the snow the night I found him. The same ring he had clung to in the cabin when the storm tried to take everything from him. But it looked different now. Not like a shackle. Not like a symbol of someone else's life. Just a piece of metal carrying a past he had outgrown. He held it carefully, almost reverently. "I don't want to pretend this is something new," he said softly. "This ring carries things I don't want to bring into our life, but I also don't want to hide from the past that led me to you." His voice wavered and he took a shaky breath. "So I had it reset, not remade, not erased, just reset so that it means something different now, something that's ours." He opened his palm. The ring gleamed under the clinic lights, simple and elegant, the old initials removed and replaced with a tiny engraving on the inside, SW and EB. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just a quiet truth. He looked up, eyes steady now. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm not asking for a promise or a timeline or anything you're not ready to give." His voice softened even more. "I'm just asking if you want this to be yours. If you want me to be someone you choose, not someone you rescue." My chest tightened with a tenderness so deep it almost hurt. I reached out slowly, letting my fingers graze his. "Yes," I whispered. He exhaled like he had been holding that breath since winter. We didn't kiss right away. We just stood there, his forehead resting against mine, our hands clasped around a ring that had gone from a symbol of captivity to a symbol of choosing. Not fate, not pressure, just choosing. Later that night, as we locked up the clinic and stepped into the soft summer air, he slipped his hand into mine and squeezed gently. "You know," he said, "if you saw a freezing man in a storm again, would you still stop?" I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. "Every time. If you stayed with me through this story, I believe it found you for a reason. Maybe because you've stopped for someone when the world told you to keep driving, or maybe because you've been the one left on a freezing road praying someone would stop for you. Life has a way of placing people in our path at the exact moment we need them, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the one that changes everything." That night on Highway 89, I thought I was saving a stranger. I didn't know I was saving a man who had never been given the freedom to choose his own life. And maybe you felt a version of that too, a moment when the world expected you to be something you never asked to be. A moment when you were forced into a role that didn't fit, a moment when you finally whispered enough even though your voice was shaking. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. Your story isn't finished, and your worth isn't measured by what you escaped, but by what you dared to build after. Evan didn't need a new last name, a new title, or a clean slate handed to him. He needed one person who saw him as human when everyone else saw him as an asset. One person who stayed when leaving would have been easier. One person who said, "You deserve to breathe." Maybe you're that person for someone. Maybe you're waiting for that person yourself. Either way, the truth is simple. The world is held together by ordinary people choosing to show up for each other in extraordinary ways. So if you've ever wondered whether small kindness matters, whether your presence makes a difference, whether stopping your life for a moment to help someone could really change anything, let this story be your reminder. It does. It always does. And if you're carrying a storm inside you, if you're exhausted or trapped or rebuilding from something that broke you, remember this storm's end. Freedom comes. Healing is slow but real. And sometimes when you least expect it, a stranger on a dark road becomes the beginning of an entirely new chapter. If this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of the good that still exists in this world, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your own storm or your own moment of unexpected kindness. Because when we tell these stories, we're not just passing time, we're keeping hope alive. And if you want more stories like this, stories about courage, compassion, redemption, and the quiet heroism inside ordinary people, make sure you're subscribed. Your next story might be the one that changes the way you see your own life.